Welcome to Lesson 2 of this CUNY Classics course. Today, we will be discussing Athenian democracy. We will begin with an overview of how it was created. We will explore its structure and impact on the people of Athens, as well as its enduring influence on governments around the globe for centuries to come. Athenian democracy was born in the 6th century BC, 510 BC, in the famous Greek city-state of Athens. A democracy is defined as a form of government that is ruled by the people or by the assembly. Greek democracy was a direct democracy, meaning that all of the Athenians voted on all of the laws. Although Athenian democracy would survive for only 2 centuries, its invention was one of ancient Greece's most important and lasting contributions to the modern world. The Greek system of direct democracy would pave the way for representative democracies across the globe. Athens' first democracy, limited though it was, operated on 2 principles new in world history, namely that we all know enough to decide how to govern our public life together, and that no one knows enough to take decisions away from us. That system had 7 features that over the centuries became the foundation for people's efforts to create democratically self-governing communities, organizations, and nations. The main values of Greek democracy were freedom from tyranny, the rule of law applied equally to all citizens, active debate, and general education designed to equip all citizens for social and political participation. The Pnyx was the official meeting place of the Athenian Democratic Assembly, which is also known as ecclesia. This is where most of the meeting and gatherings would take place. Sometime in the early 5th century, the meeting place was moved to a hill, south and west of the Acropolis. This new meeting place came to be called Pnyx, from the Greek word meaning tightly packed together. There were 3 major bodies of the government in the Athenians' direct democracy, which included the Assembly, the Council of 500, and the courts. The Assembly was the regular opportunity for all male citizens of Athens to speak their minds and exercise their votes regarding the government of their city. It was the most central and most definitive institution of Athenian democracy. The job of the Assembly was to decide on major decisions that had to be made within the city-state. Specific issues discussed in the Assembly included organizing and maintaining food supplies, initiating legislation and political trials, deciding to send envoys, deciding whether or not to sign treaties, voting to raise or spend funds, and debating military matters. The Assembly could also vote to ostracize any citizens from Athens who had become too powerful and dangerous for the polis. In ancient Greece, any free male Athenian citizen over the age of 20 could participate in the Assembly. In fact, it was his duty or job to do so. The Council of 500, also known as the Bull, represented the full-time government of Athens. It consisted of 500 citizens, 50 from each of the 10 tribes, who served for 1 year. The council could issue decrees on its own regarding certain matters, but its main function was to prepare the agenda for meetings of the assembly. The use of lot or sortition embodied the democratic principle of rotation. Athenians regarded elected office as an oligarchic or aristocratic institution because not everybody had an equal chance of occupying it, while sortition allowed citizens to take turns ruling and being ruled. Through most of the 4th and 5th centuries BC, the state even paid office holders so that ordinary citizens, otherwise constrained by economic need, could freely participate in politics. By some calculations, between 1/3 and 1/2 of all citizens in 4th century BC, Athens could have been part of the council during their lives. Institutionalizing the ancient principle of rotation in offices would have uniquely modern benefits. It would ensure that decisions reflect the concerns of the average voter, who who does not have to win over interest groups for campaign donations or the political support necessary for re-election, and it could ensure that women and minorities are represented at the table. The courts were the Supreme Court of ancient Athens. The law courts were composed of 6,000 jurors and a body of chief magistrates, chosen annually by lot. There was a specially designed machine of colored tokens to ensure those selected were chosen randomly, a process magistrates had to go through twice. It was in the courts that laws made by the assembly could be challenged and decisions were made regarding ostracism, naturalization, and remission of debt. For public lawsuits, the jury consisted of at least 501 people. For private lawsuits, the jury was comprised of a minimum of 201 people. Only freeborn, adult male Athenian citizens who had completed their military training had the right to vote in Athens. Slaves, women, freed slaves, and foreigners who lived in Athens were not permitted to vote. Therefore, it's important to remember that while we think of Greek democracy as equal and representative, the democratic government in ancient Athens was run by male Athenian upperclassmen. Slavery was prevalent in ancient Greece, especially in the city-state of Athens. The slaves were brought to Greece and purchased through the slave trade. Approximately 30 to 40% of the Greek population was comprised of slaves. Athens was home to an estimated 60,000 to 80,000 slaves during the 5th and 4th centuries BC, with each household having an average of 3 or 4 enslaved people. Athenian slaves tended to enjoy more freedom than those elsewhere. A typical Athenian slave formed part of his master's household and was initially welcomed with ceremony, offered nuts and fruits, just as a new bride might be. While denied many of the judicial rights possessed by Athenian citizens, Athenian slaves enjoyed a few personal liberties. They could follow their own religious customs, and they couldn't be hit by their master. Additionally, Athenians who experienced financial hardships could become a slave themselves through a practice called debt enslavement. For example, if they leased land from a landowner but could not make the rent payments, they would become enslaved to that landowner until the debt had been satisfied. Many enslaved people were foreigners who were prisoners of war. Sons of defeated enemies might also be forced into slavehood. Many enslaved people were born into servitude, resigned to a life captivity as they inherited the family trade. Thank you so much for watching. Join us next week for a very exciting and informative lesson on the cuisine of the ancient Greeks.